Hello, I'm Brian Callanan. After months of debate, the City Council has finally passed legislation on public drug use and possession. Will officers be making more arrests? Are there enough drug treatment services for those who need help? And it's budget time. What issues are shaping up as top priorities for the city? Plus, are you ready for a new way to vote for City Council members? I'm talking with Citywide Councilmember Sara Nelson about these questions and the ones you're sending in too, next on Council Edition.
It doesn't really matter who is paying the check at a small business downtown, whether or not they're on vacation or on business travel. That helps our small businesses downtown and throughout the city.
It's all next on Council Edition. And here she is, Citywide Council Position 9, Councilmember Sara Nelson. Very good to have you with me. Thanks for being here. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me back. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you for making time for this. I want to jump into the ordinance that the city has been working on over the past several months to make public drug use or drug possession gross misdemeanors in line with state law. And just two concepts to bring home here, folks. This law intends to give officers more clarity as to when they can make an arrest, asking them to determine if a person is causing harm to the public. The new law would also invest more in drug treatment options for people dealing with addiction. Now, you've been talking about legislation like this since April, the end of April there. You held a press conference with City Attorney Ann Davison, Councilmember Peterson. Looking back on what you proposed then and what the council is working on right now, did the council get it right? Some thoughts about that.
Well, it's interesting because what we proposed initially was to prohibit public use as a simple misdemeanor. So it is interesting to me that we're going, that in following state law, we're about to make possession and public use a gross misdemeanor. The conversation has changed since back then, and I am simply glad that we are finally doing what we need to do all along, which is conform with state law and provide another incentive for people to get into treatment and finally address this problem head on.
Got it. And what has changed in terms of that discussion? You mentioned that it's that rhetoric, I guess, has changed a little bit. How would you describe that?
Sure. Well, this has all occurred within the backdrop of what was going on in Olympia.
Yeah.
So the legislation that City Attorney Davison, Councilmember Peterson, and I put forward in April, we put that forward about 3 days after the legislature closed without a resolution
That's right.
too late.
There was that special session that needed to happen. That's right.
Right. And then there was rumor that the governor was going to call a special session. Mm-hmm. And so within a week or so of our announcement, my council member colleagues were saying, we can't do anything now because we need to wait until the special session resolves because we don't want to be out of alignment with other jurisdictions and state law. And so we thought, okay, so then they came out with the new law, making it a gross misdemeanor. We resubmitted simple conforming legislation.
Right.
But then the conversation changed. We were trying to conform with state law and neighboring jurisdictions, but the conversation shifted to, some people were saying, just let's not do this at all. And other people were saying it's another war on drugs. Other people were saying that we don't have the system set up for diversion. And so that's what I mean when I say the conversation shifted. But from the get-go, I've been clear that what's happening right now isn't working because we have skyrocketing overdoses from fentanyl and other drugs. And so we have got to do something soon to address this.
Thank you. I'm going to dive into some of those different points you were bringing up here because you were working on an amendment with this law that removed the requirement for officers to make a reasonable attempt to get services for someone using drugs before arresting them. Some people I know have concerns about this, and I know you've heard them. One writer put it this way: very sad how the changes in the language simply moved the discretionary action down to the level of the police officer. We've all seen how their discretion seems to go. I know some people see it differently. This writer not supportive of giving police this much discretion in these cases. Help me out with this amendment. Why did you make it? What do you think it's going to accomplish?
First of all, by writing the assessment of the threat to harm to others directly into the law, we've still got the judgment of the officer center stage.
Right.
Okay, and I was concerned that if it would be very easy to have, although they will have probable cause to make an arrest.
Right. That needs to happen first.
Right.
Yeah.
Those cases could be considered. They could be dismissed before even going to trial.
I see.
Mind you, trial and jail, all of that is not the goal. But if the legitimacy of the arrest turns on the decision-making of the officer, that complicates things.
I see.
And it also, I said from the get-go on August 14th that if the judgment of the officer is basically subject to dispute, then we could be opening ourselves up to charges of biased policing. So either way, I thought that was a complicating factor. It's less so by removing the mandatory directive. In other words, there is still discretion, even without putting that into the law. Officers, their actions are based on their discretion every day.
Yes.
And so, therefore, I was trying to remove risk to the city.
I see. Rather than make it too prescriptive, allow officers to make the decision, which can include this idea of diversion, treatment, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there is widespread agreement that an officer intervention, the goal is to allow for stopping potentially negative behavior right in the moment,
Sure.
and then helping steward that person into a diversion program.
Thank you for that. And I want to talk about those programs just a little bit, because the mayor has certainly been calling for more treatment options, diversion services to help deal with our drug crisis. I know the challenge is how you pay for them. Councilmember Mosqueda brought up this concern at a recent meeting, pointing out that two major services the city refers people to, LEAD, Let Everyone Advance with Dignity, and PDA, Purpose, Dignity, and Action, have been operating with one-time funding for the past several years.
If we don't fill this funding gap, it will harm LEAD and PDA's ability to accept referrals, which are the centerpiece of what supposedly makes this bill different from previous iterations.
Councilmember Nelson, I just want to get your thoughts about funding for these diversion and treatment programs. How do you fund them now and into the future? This is a very important part of this.
I appreciate that question. The fact is that every other municipality in the state of Washington has conformed by now to state law. And I'm sure that many of them are cash-strapped to pay for diversion, which is called for and encouraged in the state law. So all cities are in the same position, but it seems as though only in Seattle is this producing a barrier to actually conforming to state law. So I do want to put that on the table.
Okay.
And what I will say is that there will never be enough money to probably meet all the needs of the people in our city.
That's fair.
Whatever
Okay.
that, and so right now the lead and co-lead, the 2023 budget is $29 million.
Yes.
The mayor's, and most of that comes from the city of Seattle. The mayor's legislation calls for $27 million. There are $51 million in the state bill that will go to local jurisdictions. What matters to me is that money is being spent to help people put their lives back together, and hopefully attain treatment that will help them potentially with multiple drug substance use disorders.
Yeah.
And so I don't feel that we should be holding hostage the potential of helping people right now if we're in a debate over exactly how much is necessary.
Right.
People are dying right now. Right now, and the longer we dither, the more people will die, and we've got to get something on the books so that we can provide another incentive for people to get into treatment.
Thank you. And I guess that's been the point. I mean, these services and the fact that they're underfunded, that's been an issue long before the Blake case even came to light. I mean, is that kind of where you're going with this?
That's where I'm going with it, and it is not trivial. It is not trivial at all. I am not saying that. I am just saying that we can, we can go down a rabbit hole of debate over how much is enough before we'll do this, or we can do it right now and address soaring overdose fatalities and a lot of the crime that's associated with the drug trade.
Yeah. Let's talk about that criminal piece and how these cases might get prosecuted if criminal charges are warranted here. I know the city attorney pulled out of the agreement the city had with the municipal court for the community court system back in June. Is there something else in place, a drug court or something along those lines, where these possession and use cases could be heard? Do you know what's going on there?
Well, I do, because I am a member of that subgroup of the mayor's fentanyl systems task force.
Right.
And so it met 2 or 3 times over the past, well, since it was announced early in June.
Right.
And those conversations are continuing. What will replace community court? So I do have to note, however, that issue is not directly related to the prosecution of possession and public use. Drug crimes in and of themselves did not go through community court.
Okay.
The city attorney's announcement that program would end occurred at the same time when we were talking about this, the first piece of legislation.
Yeah, in April,
And
right.
yeah, April or so,
Yeah.
yes. So the issues became conflated in the public consciousness,
I see.
and there was a lot of emotion about community court, but unfortunately the two are separate.
Okay. I guess what is going to come out of it? What would you like to see come out of it in terms of a court system that deals with something that might represent more like a drug court, some diversion possibilities there? What do you want to see come out? What kind of system?
What I learned in these discussions, and there were judges and staff from the city attorney's office, another council member, Lisa Dugard. There were a lot of people that knew a lot more about community court. What I learned was that was the 3rd iteration of community court.
I see.
So, so clearly each iteration had some issues and needed to be improved. And so I am not in a position, with all humility, to say what should come from that.
Okay.
I do believe that a form of drug court would be really great, because that directly addresses substance use disorder. However, what I've been told in those meetings is that is extremely expensive, because there has to be some kind of contracting or relationship with providers.
I see.
So I will let the people that know more make the final say in what comes from that.
Right, and this work is ongoing, and I just wanted to
is.
talk about this to wrap up this conversation. In terms of putting this together, I think you're right in saying that not all these pieces have to be in place, like drug court, et cetera, before law is passed, but it does make for some uncertainty, I guess, out there. It's like, well, what happens with the court? Well, wait, how are we going to pay for it? And I guess in wrapping up this conversation, Councilmember Nelson, what do you hope comes out of the passage of this law? Where are we going to go from here? What's our drug crisis going to look like a year from now, and what type of an effect will this law have on that?
What I hope will come out is that the overdose fatality numbers will go down, that people feel safer going to and from work and circulating downtown, and that we finally address head-on what has been lurking and growing in this region for a long time, which is our fentanyl crisis. Washington State had the highest number of overdoses in 2022 than any other state in the nation. So it is high time that we actually do something different. We have to do something in addition to what we have been doing in order to reverse those trends.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to some other work that the council's been doing, actually some work on a new Seattle tourism improvement area, trying to ramp up tourism in the city with a new 2.3% fee applied to hotels in this area. Basically, we're talking about an area that goes from Gaylor Street to Royal Brougham and the waterfront up to 12th Avenue. I thought that there were 2 slides that the council saw from Visit Seattle on this topic that made for a very compelling story. One of them, projected bookings for Seattle's new convention center aren't looking great over the next couple of years. 2, looking at how other major cities invest in tourism. Seattle's not tops on that list. You're aware of this. I wanted to talk about this. What's going to change with this new version of the STIA, as it's called?
Okay, thank you very much for your interest, because, yes, last week in my committee was a big week for business improvement areas.
Yes.
And the STIA, the Seattle Tourism Improvement Area, is one of many BIAs. And the way it works is that 71 hotels charge their guests a fee, and that fee goes into a pot so that Visit Seattle can spend that money not to promote those hotels, just to promote downtown. Visit Seattle promotes Seattle and business districts across the city.
Right.
And so last year, we renewed the STIA's fee.
Yes.
It went from $2 per night per guest.
Yes.
Which it had been for 10 years.
Right.
To $4.
Okay.
That was a big improvement, okay? But at the same time, it became clear that that we now have this brand new, gorgeous convention center, and the budget for promoting the convention center was had suffered losses, and so they needed help. The convention center needed some funding to not just to promote itself, but also to pay staff to make those bookings. We can't have a convention center if people aren't using it, and the money that those hotels generated could only be used to promote leisure travel.
Right, not the business
travel.
and convention stuff, right? Right.
Yeah, and so this legislation allowed for the use of that money to be spent also to help fill the convention center and the hotels that serve the guests there. And I'll tell you, it doesn't really matter who is paying the check at a small business downtown, whether or not they're on vacation or on business travel. That helps our small businesses downtown and throughout the city.
Right, and I should point out this STIA, the members of it, they agree to assess themselves these fees and these sort of things to improve the tourism there. And it sounds like a lot of the people in that area said, yes, we do want to do this because of what's going on here.
70% of the ratepayers.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal, and I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. But in terms of the impact you're hoping this would have, talk to me about this. Is this going to improve those booking numbers for the convention center, let's say? Is this going to mean a bigger investment into tourism for the city of Seattle?
Yes.
And then maybe if you could add on to that, what's going to happen with jobs? Because I know that's been a bit of an issue, too, trying to build back that tourism industry and the jobs that are really important with it. I mean, a $7.4 billion a year type of industry here, this is a big deal for King County.
Absolutely. And people can look back at the summer and say, hey, tourism is great in Seattle. That's a great time to visit Seattle.
Right.
But we are also talking about the need to promote conventions throughout the year. And people book conventions years in advance.
Right.
Okay, so we are talking jobs and we're talking the promotion of Seattle. And I don't know if I got to this point, but so it had been $4.
Yes.
And with passage of this legislation, the fee will go to 2.3%.
I mentioned that earlier, right? Yeah.
Yes, and so that that means that the fee is proportionate to the cost of the stay.
It can grow over time, et cetera. Yeah.
Right, and it's not regressive, so that a guest who's staying in a more expensive hotel pays more than somebody who's staying in a less expensive hotel.
Yeah.
This is what Portland does.
Yeah.
And we're competing against Portland for that business travel. And so I am hoping that this will make Seattle more competitive and provide more money at the same time for to promote our businesses and to grow our job base.
Got it. Can you touch briefly on what's happening with the Ballard improvement area? Because I know that one was approved recently, too, in committee. What's that going to do for that neighborhood? Because I know they've been through a lot there, and they're certainly looking for some support. Talk to me about Ballard and what's happening in that area.
Sure. So, again, the Ballard Alliance is another one of the city's business improvement areas.
Right.
And just so your folks know, the ratepayers agreed to charge themselves.
That's right.
So, and that money goes into a pot of money that in most cases is used to beautify the neighborhood, pick up trash, remove graffiti, put lights in the trees at holiday time. Promote the local businesses, put on festivals, all of those things. That's not just good for the businesses that are, or the property owners that are paying that money. It's good for the neighborhood as a whole. Sure. And it's good for Seattle in general. So, so we owe a debt of gratitude to all of our BIAs and the ratepayers that agree to pay this, which benefits all of us. And we saw that there was really strong support for the renewal of the mid downtown as well.
Right. Another example.
Yeah, so essentially with the Ballard BIA, I believe that it had started in 2011.
Yes.
And there is no change to the assessment.
Okay.
However, there is some slight modification to the boundary of the BIA itself.
Okay. So those benefits will still keep coming in. Thank you very much for that. I wanted to talk about an interesting issue before the council recently, how we vote to put council members like you in office. The council is talking about staggering those terms such that we would vote for 4 members in 1 year, 5 the next, so we don't have all 7 district seats up at once like we have this year, for example. This would be a charter amendment, so it would require a public vote. Why are you considering this?
You will have to ask the proponent.
Okay, okay.
This has not been referred yet. It has
Fair.
been discussed once in the Finance and Housing Committee.
Okay. Do you think it's a good idea, is what I was putting out?
No.
Oh, okay. All
I
right.
do not. First, and primarily based on the principle that our current system, our 7 districts and our 2 citywide positions, and when they are on the ballot, that was the product of a citizens' initiative in 2013.
Okay.
And here we're about to, one council member is saying that we should change it with very little public discussion and without really articulating what is the problem that this will solve and what is the evidence of that problem. That's what I take into any policy discussion, but especially when it comes to elections.
Yeah.
And even especially when that election system was a product of a people's initiative. Okay, so that is the thing. I did talk to Eugene Wasserman, who was the chair of the Seattle District Now committee that put that on the ballot. And and in fact, there were some good reasons why it was set up the way it was. And the 4 citywide positions, 2 council members, mayor and city attorney, were not on the ballot at the same time on purpose. And I can go into the reasons for that, but there was a well-reasoned set rationale for the way it was set up. And I think just going in and moving things around without really talking about what will be the pros and cons, it does a disservice to our democratic system right now.
It would be a public vote. I mean, the public would have the chance to decide on something like this. And I guess the idea, just for a little devil's advocate here, I think the idea is to try to avoid as much institutional turnover in case, let's say, all 7 positions are up and different. We have new people in office. That's great. But at the same time, there's a certain learning curve, as you know, with City Hall in terms of getting council members up to speed on how to pass legislation and stuff. Your thoughts on that piece of it, I guess the other side of the argument.
Well, first of all, I'll say, devil's advocate, if people want to throw out all 7, they have that right.
That's right.
All right?
Okay.
And so, but at the same time, I have not heard any complaints from my constituents that have said that they didn't feel that they could fully participate in the electoral process. And yes, there is always the potential for disruption, but again, it was set up this way for a reason. And yes, the voters will decide, but council will be put in the position of saying, we have to, by putting it on the ballot, we are saying there is a problem right now.
I see.
And that case has to be made to me. I do want to mention that this does contain, the legislation contains a ballot title that includes a call for a change, if the state gives permission, to even year elections for local government. That is extremely concerning to me. Why? Because our elections are every other year. And people, local government isn't sexy, but the decisions made by those people, by office holders, affect people's lives every single day, from public safety to potholes. And if those races have to compete on a ballot with state and federal and potentially presidential race, I am concerned that people will not get the information, because you won't be reading headlines about the candidate forum with, with all the mayoral candidates or with the city council candidates. So alone.
Make for a crowded ballot. I see what you're saying.
Right, a crowded ballot in a shrinking news landscape. So I think that the quality of public information is very important when it comes to local elections.
Okay, thank you for your feedback on that. I wanted to talk about another plan you have in the works to expand the number of electric vehicle chargers in the city of Seattle. As I understand it, City Light would potentially lease out city property to a private company to run a station, or City Light might rent out a space from private property owners to make this happen. What's the goal here? What's happening?
The goal here is to make it easier to charge an electric vehicle. Brian, the good news is that 25%, close to 25% of new vehicles purchased in Seattle are electric vehicles. That's great. We tend to be an early adopter city. The bad news is that Our network of chargers of electric vehicle charging stations has not grown. So unless you have a charger in your home or apartment complex or at your workplace, it's very difficult, especially in what about for visitors that come.
Sure.
And so City Light has installed electric chargers on city property. You know, perhaps that's not very convenient. So we have to get creative. And this is allowing for the flexibility to partner with a vendor that could put it on public property, or to partner with the owner of, say, a parking lot surrounded by small businesses, where people can charge their car while they patronize one of those businesses. So there is an economic development component. Of course, I'm always going to see that.
Yes, you're the head of that committee, right?
But we have to get more creative because we need to fulfill our climate goals and also implement the City Lights transportation electrification plan.
Right. The state's saying by 2035 we're not supposed to have any new vehicles that are not electrically charged. So thank you for that. Mailbag time here. A quick land use question for you here. Anson writes in this. I want to know what's happening with the proposed affordable housing development in Fort Lawton. The city's own website hasn't been updated since 2019, and the inaction seems, well, irresponsible. Is this how we deal with a housing crisis? A big question there on Fort Lawton. I know it's been an issue for years. Any thoughts on this one?
Can I claim I'll get back to you?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I know this has just been a big issue for so long. Maybe we can talk about affordable housing writ large a little bit, because I know that's an issue for you too. And any thoughts on that bigger issue?
My position is that anything that we can do to remove barriers to expanding housing options, we should do.
Okay.
And so I don't know what the holdup is at Fort Lawton.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that we do have a housing affordability crisis, and there are many ways we can tackle it. We'll have the housing levy on the ballot. That will be great.
Yep.
We also have a lot of, there are projects in the pipeline to build affordable housing. We've got the multifamily tax exemption program, which puts affordable units in private developments. And my favorite, we can make it easier and less expensive to produce new units, and that has to do with permitting, cutting some red tape. So it's all hands on deck, and we need to do all of the above.
Thank you. I appreciate you working with me on that. Maybe one last question to wrap up. Budget priorities for the fall. Can you talk to me about that? I know this is a big issue coming up every fall. Your thoughts about where your budget priorities are, big picture.
Well, we have already endorsed the 2024 budget, and so there will be very little room for changes, and council members will have to, if they propose an addition to the budget, they have got to identify a cut. So I don't know what my other colleagues are planning, but in my committee, we passed a resolution that endorsed the Office of Economic Development's Future of Seattle Economy investment agenda.
Right.
And this was the culmination of a community-driven process where stakeholders identified different investment areas that would help build generational wealth.
Sure.
And so what I am going to be focused on is making sure that the investment agenda, whatever those particular budget items, that I'm going to try to protect those items, because that is the department that I oversee, and I think that economic development is we have got to do everything we possibly can to promote economic development, especially in neighborhoods where people are being displaced and opportunities are far fewer.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I know a lot still ahead, and for next year too, with a budget gap to talk about as well. Thank you very much, Councilmember Nelson. Thanks for everybody who's watching out there. We'll see you next time on Council Edition.